If anyone's watching live, apologies for the slight technical hitch there, which meant we're a bit late going live, but that is the nature of the beast sometimes. So we are live to you from the Yorkshire Museum in York, UK. This is one of a series of talks that we're running while we're sadly closed to the public, and we're reopening in the spring, so keep an eye out for our announcements about that. We've got some really exciting stuff coming up. But while we're closed, we thought we would take you on a whistle-stop tour through our collection. So this is a series of live talks that we're doing. The last one I did was on the oldest thing in our collections, and the York Museum Trust collections, which is all the way down here at 4.6 billion years old. And we're going to leap through the entire geological column and talk about things which are only hundreds of thousands of years old. But yes, if you have any questions, do feel free to put them in the comment section, and we'll get to them at the end. And yeah, I think we'll make a start at last. Okay, so I'll begin at the beginning of our story. So it's about 200 years ago. We're talking about summer 1821. So other maps are available, but this is a really beautiful book that we have that I'll tell you a little bit more about later. So we're down here in York, and the site we're talking about today is called Kirkdale Cave. It's about 20 miles, pretty much directly north of York. So, as I said, in July 1821, there was a local chap from Kirby Moorside, a little town just quite close to Kirkdale Cave. Local chap was walking around and spotted in the roads that there were some unusual looking bones. He was a surgeon, so he sort of recognised that they weren't animals from the local area. So this was the sort of thing he was finding. The road building material was traced back to Kirkdale Cave. So this is the sort of aggregate, if you like, that was coming out of the cave. And if I turn it over, I really like these specimens because it sort of shows you what can be just below the surface, if only you knew. So this is a sort of surface that would have been found inside the cave itself. So it's known as sort of flow stone. So if you think about sort of stalactites and stalagmites and water sort of dripping in caves, this is a sort of deposit that builds up. So it's really quite smooth, but actually underneath, it was hiding all of these bones crushed up together. So, and this is another one. This has had a lot more handling over the years, and it's actually got some quite discoloured varnish on the other side of it that was put on much before we came to care for this stuff ourselves, and we wouldn't do that now. But this is a really lovely specimen, as you can see, really clear tooth there, and some of the fragments of bone. So once the sort of word got out about this site, there was lots of interest from local people, and they started sort of building up collections of curios from the spoil heaps from the quarry and that sort of thing. And this is a sort of contemporary etching of people outside the entrance to the cave over here, and a couple of gentlemen discussing what was going on. So a little bit later, a chap called John Gibson, who was based in Kirby Moorside but actually worked in London, decided to do a bit more of a systematic clearance of a section of the cave and sent some of the bones down to the Royal College of Surgeons in London, who was sort of the expert anatomist of the day. So that journey took 5 weeks by sea, because that was the quickest way to do it at the time. And it was confirmed that there were bones of a great age, whatever that sort of means, and there were lots of hyena bones in there, which was obviously extremely unusual. So fast forward to autumn 1821, and this is where the man of the hour gets involved. So this is a chap called William Buckland, who was the first professor of geology at Oxford University. So this is him sort of with some of his other things that have sort of become important in his life slightly after this point. So this is actually a hyena skull that he's holding here. So he became interested in the site, and he came and visited in December 1821. So he was a man of the cloth, and later in his life he would become the Dean of Westminster, but he was also a man of science, and he was extremely hands-on. He was well known for quite sort of eccentric behaviour, so he was known for trying to eat his way through the animal kingdom. So he reported that he didn't particularly like the taste of blue bottles, and he didn't particularly like the taste of moles, but a lot of the other stuff was apparently quite tasty. So he was an interesting guy, and he was very hands-on, and he wanted to sort of do experiments to figure things out. So he, at this point also, to go back to our beautiful book here, a chap called William Salmond had come across from York and actually surveyed the site properly and excavated it. So you can see this is the base of the cave here, and it actually goes back in away from the hillside about 60 yards. So this is mapped out all of the passageways that were known at that time, and actually this is exactly as Buckland used it. This is a book that Buckland published in 1823 called Reliquiae Diluvianae, and he used Salmon's work, and here's another little sort of etching of people working at the site at the time. So this is really quite nice because William Salmond and another chap called James Atkinson, who was a York-based surgeon again, made a really large collection of bones from the site, and in fact today we have about 500 bones and all sorts of specimens from the Kirkdale Cave site, and about 250 of them came to us in 1822, and in December 1822 was when the Yorkshire Philosophical Society was founded, and so obviously 2022 is quite a special year, and there were about 250 specimens in that initial donation, but we continued to get specimens until about 1855. So some of the animals that were actually found in the cave when Buckland was starting to properly investigate were some really, really interesting things. So these are things that we don't find in Yorkshire today, obviously. So with things like straight-tusked elephant. So this is, if you've ever seen sort of mammoth teeth in fossil shops and things like that, that's a really tiny elephant tooth. We've got things like bear teeth. So this is, I picked this one up because it's still got a lovely label attached to it. It actually says cave bear on it, of Cuvier, who was a really famous French anatomist, and he was also aware of the site, and he was confirming the identification of these bones at the same time. But you can see it's a bear tooth. We now know that it's a brown bear, because as I'll mention in a second, some of the identifications were a little bit fanciful. Over here we've got a tooth from a giant deer. These were incredible animals because their antlers were known to get up to about 3 to 4 meters across, so incredibly large animals. And here, this is really cool because these are bits of common hippopotamus. So this is a section of tusk here, and this is one of the sort of grinding teeth, if you like. So these are the roots, and that's the grinding surface. So these are really exciting because they're actually the northernmost occurrence in the world of common hippos. So there was one more specimen that was reported from Stockton-on-Tees, but currently no one knows what that is. So at the moment, the material that's come out of Kirkdale Cave is spread in other places as well. As I said, some of it ended up in London. Obviously, lots of people had it, and there's a big collection in Whitney Museum as well as a lot of other places that have a few bits and bobs of it. But what was really interesting, as I mentioned before, when the first material went down to London, were all these remains of hyenas, and this is a really fabulous specimen of a hyena jaw. I'm not going to pick it up because his teeth are slightly loose these days, and it's got a lovely label saying Kirkdale Cave there as well. So obviously at the time it was more than 30 years before Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species was going to be published, so pretty much the story of creation in the Bible was fairly immutable amongst the sort of the general public at the time. So how did all these animals get, hippos, that sort of thing, that now live in tropical climates? How did they end up in Yorkshire? Well, obviously they were washed in by the Great Flood. But Buckland knew that this was an unusual site, and he went on the evidence before him. So he investigated the cave, and he found that the entrances weren't big enough for these large animals to have got through, and also that the roof was never open to the elements, so there was no way things could have been just sort of washed in. And these really interesting, the prevalence of hyena bones was really interesting as well. So as well as the sort of the obvious remains, there were things like these tiny little sort of almost white, almost spherical things here, which were really quite unusual. And also, when some of these sort of less identifiable bones that have been really, really chewed, this one actually has some bits inside if I shake it very, very gently, just about here. It's really split here. It's been really sort of splintered. And also, you can see the pitting there. And here it's been really, really, it's had a hard time, this bone. So Buckland was identifying all the animals in the cave, and he came up with, I think, a list of about 22, 23. And remember, at the time, there was lots of local trade going on. So there was a few things that got mixed in that probably weren't there at the time, but we have representatives of all of this stuff in the collections, but this is the nicest stuff. So the list that is now sort of definitive, people have re-identified things and reassessed the material over the years. There's 18 animals found in the cave. So there's wolf, red fox, brown bear, stoat, lion, cave hyena, which are these fellas, straight-tusked elephant, hippopotamus, red deer, fallow deer, giant deer, bison, rhinoceros, brown hare, mouse, bank vole, water vole, and field vole. So there are 18 animals that were identified. But as I say, Buckland was putting all this evidence together, and he decided that the only possible explanation was that these animals were being dragged in by the hyenas. So they lived in the area at the time, and they'd been pulled in as food for the hyenas, which is why all of these things, all of this material was in this sort of condition. This was really a really startling theory for the time, so especially from a theologian, but he actually gained a huge amount of support for his theory. He won the Copley Medal from the Royal Society in 1822, and he was so sort of spurred on by this incredible success that he published this book that we've been looking at, Reliquiae Diluvianae, in 1823, which is freely available on Google. It's out of copyright now, so you can download your very own copy if you want, but this is a beautiful contemporary copy that we've got. So, Reliquiae Diluvianae, which is the remains of the flood, basically. But he had, rather than saying these animals had been washed in by the flood, he was suggesting that they lived here at the time, and then in fact only been sort of covered with a small layer of mud from the flood. And actually later in his life he decided there was no evidence for the Great Flood after all, but that's a different story. And he had great success from this, and he actually went on to describe the very first dinosaur bones before the word dinosaur was even coined. So in 1824, he described Megalosaurus, which now, those specimens now live in the Oxford University Museum of Natural History. So this was an incredible moment in science, and we've got some incredible material here to tell that story. So at the time, however, whether people agree with Buckland or not, people were generally in agreement that the material couldn't be much more than 4,000 years old. Now with radiometric dating, we know from dating some of this flowstone that the cave is something like 121,000 years old. So that puts it in the Ipswichian interglacial, which is the last interglacial period, more or less, so that there's been a few ups and downs, but the last sort of interglacial period where it was much warmer in the area, which is how these sorts of animals were able to survive, of course. So shortly after Kirkdale Cave was occupied was when the Scandinavian ice sheet came in, the last glacial period. There were lots of little nuances to it, but basically there was an enormous ice sheet that covered most of the northern British Isles. This is the sort of thing that carved things like the Yorkshire Dales, so the really exciting sort of karst landscape that you see, and then it also deposited lots of sediments around. So, for example, in the Vale of York, that sort of shaped where we are today. It sort of shaped the landscape as we see it. And in fact, there are actually some erratic boulders in York Museum Gardens as well. They've been brought hundreds of miles by the ice sheets. So, sort of coming full circle, after that ice sheet then retracted about 12,000 years ago, that's when we find the first evidence of people living in Yorkshire, which is Starcar, which is our next talk in the series. But just to sort of bring us right up to date, briefly, so this is, I just wanted to show you what Kirkdale Cave looks like today. So this is, unfortunately, there's a large tree which sort of casts a shadow right across the mouth of the cave, but this is it today. It's in a triple SI, so it's a protected site. You can visit it, but there's not a huge amount to see because obviously all of the bones and things have been taken out over the years. It's about sort of 3 or 4 metre climb up, but you can go in and have a peek. It's sort of just by the roadside. There's not, it's in the middle of nowhere really. But I just wanted to show you, it's actually within, it's quite topical because we're in the Jurassic galleries in the Yorkshire Museum today. And the rock that surrounds Kirkdale Cave is actually Upper Jurassic Limestone, so which we have a whole gallery about, which I hope you'll come and see when we reopen. But this is my finger but geologists tend to use whatever comes to hand to make a scale for whatever they're sort of looking at the time. So actually, you can see small shells in here. There's a little gastropod snail. So it just goes to show that wherever you are in Yorkshire, you're not all that far from Jurassic rocks. So that was sort of bringing us full circle to where we are standing literally today. And if anyone has any questions, I will do my best to answer them.
While we wait for questions, can you tell us a bit more about the little fossil?
Yes, absolutely, yes. So I forgot to mention that the sort of Buckland being as he is, he managed to acquire a live hyena. So we had theories about why the hyena, the fauna was dominated by hyena. So he acquired a live hyena, as obviously you could do in 1820, and fed it bits of ox, and the bones that came out the bones that resulted were very pitted and splintered, and the things that came out the other end of the hyena looked very much like this. So the hyena that he acquired, legend has it that he was planning to eat it, to continue his trip through the animal kingdom of trying to eat one of everything. But he became attached to it and named it Billy and kept it as a pet. So that was that's the little story that goes with that. But at the same time he was looking at this material, Mary Anning was looking at all sorts of things. She was digging out some incredible paleontology on the south coast in Lyme Regis. And she was corresponding with Buckland, and she'd found some very interesting stuff, which she theorised was fossilised species, basically. And Buckland was really interested in this stuff, and he agreed with her sort of diagnosis. And he basically coined the term that we now use today in 1829, coprolite, for fossilised species. And he was so taken with these things that he collected a load of them in just outside Edinburgh in the 1830s, and he got them cut and polished and made into a table, which you can now see in the Lyme Regis Museum. So, very interesting character, Buckland.
Do we know what this bone is here?
This one here? No. But I imagine, it's probably something like a bison or maybe one of the rhinos. It's sort of, we don't know what this guy is either. It's just a sort of large long bone which has just been completely decimated by these hyenas chomping through. So yes, a large mammal.
That's it.
Lovely stuff. Thank you very much for coming along virtually today, and keep an eye out on our social media for our next talks, and when we reopen. So see you next time.